Welcome to Real Turkey Channel. I am Attila Yeşilada, your host. We shall start the official broadcast in a few minutes. I always arrive from a wrong channel, so they immediately warn me. Today we're going to talk about central bank reserves, which may sound like a very obscure subject, but it isn't. I'm going to start by talking about the spread of COVID-19 pandemic, how it affects emerging markets, and then move on to Turkey and how Turkey is placed within the context of EM and how long Turkey's COVID-19 outbreak is likely to last. I will conclude that resort function, and Turkey has huge foreign borrowing needs. The government ought to plan for a scenario where Turkey's ability to borrow from abroad would be severely restricted, not necessarily because, and some of them are immediately leaving as well. I think I can wrap up the whole subject in 20 minutes. A member of the audience says, can you tell us opportunities to develop? I don't give investment advice, but my small portfolio is invested in gold. That's the only safe asset. And another member of the audience says, the broadcast freezes. This is honestly not my fault. I invested into the high-speed internet connections in Turkey, but the lines are so overloaded because in large cities, at least, most Turks have self-quarantined. And of course, when you're self-quarantined, you use internet. There's nothing else to do. And that strains the resources of our already inadequate internet capacity. I may try to broadcast at 3 a.m. in the morning, but that is probably when the internet is most crowded because everyone is checking the porn sites, even though it is illegal in Turkey to visit porn sites, but everyone is using VPN. Okay, it's 12:30 Istanbul time. Now I am starting the official broadcast. Everything I say will be used against me in a court of justice. Welcome to Real Turkey and sharing their opinions with you, but there is no visiting in Turkey and other people are also stuck in their homes. So for the time being, I shall be reflecting views from Turkey, hopefully in an independent manner. Today's broadcast is focused about Turkey's FX reserves, which are dwindling rapidly and are not sufficient enough to cover Turkey's FX borrowing needs. This may sound like an obscure issue, but actually it's at the crux of Turkey's financial and eventually economic stability. The financial wherewithal to unveil packages, the sum of which runs into trillions of dollars or euros. But of course, the maneuvering room for most emerging markets is extremely limited. Moreover, they are dependent either on oil sales, other commodity sales, or exports to developed markets, or tourism, as in case of Turkey. And unfortunately, all of these industries are now in a slump because of the worldwide quarantines, and most airlines are bankrupt. So emerging market growth is slumping very sharply, and the wherewithal to provide the necessary relief packages is simply not. Developed markets versus developing markets, emerging markets, with the latter performing very poorly. If you look at the performance, for one thing, there are countries like Turkey, Argentina, South Africa, Lebanon, and at least a dozen in Africa, the names of which I can't pronounce properly, which have solvency issues, which means they have too much debt, which their tax revenues cannot cover, and they could soon declare bankruptcy or moratorium, as it is called. Argentina is already, importantly, since 2008, when Fed started the QE and just flooded the world with cheap money, most emerging market companies have borrowed without concern for future and have not used these sums for productive export generating or technology improving investments. As a result, they're heavily indebted but don't have the cash flow to fade off. So any grades and also corporate bond defaults. All of which tells me that as long as the COVID-19 pandemic is laying waste to the world, the EM situation is not going to improve. And how long will that last? Possibly over the summer, but these are not the problem countries. The problem is Latin America and Africa, where the virus is spreading rapidly. Russia, which is underreporting cases, and India with its huge population, where we don't even know how many cases are truly walking around in the population, super carriers who don't even know they are sick. And as long as this huge population centers keep spreading grumpy conservative, I am planning that the year 2020 is lost, and through 2020, emerging markets will have difficult time drawing money. Of course, some of them will do better in terms of managing their financial affairs, their monetary affairs, and the health crises, and they will be able to decouple positively from the rest. So the question is, will Turkey be among that category? I pray to Odin, my favorite god, that eventually it will be qualified in that category, but unfortunately that's not the case. Turkey is now in a trajectory that's as steep as Italy, which means that every 3 days or so, new diagnoses are doubling, and within a week or 10 days, Turkey could be reporting 30,000 cases. Nothing short of a curfew, a nationwide curfew, could slow the spread of the virus, because it's now widespread within the Çanakkale, right at the Dardanelles, and that's just going to get worse. There is no way you can stop this until you tell people you stay home or you get whipped. And Turkey can't handle 30,000 or more cases simply because we don't have enough doctors, enough ICUs, enough ventilators, etc., etc. It must be remembered that the war against COVID-19 is a war of attrition. As patients accumulate, the medical staff gets tired, they get infected. You can replace machinery and equipment, will feel the severity of this situation. So, in my view, I think that the spread of COVID infections, 1 million, 1.5 million until summer months, and if we lose tourism, 2.5 million unemployed people, and paying unemployment insurance to these people would bankrupt the treasury. These are the dynamics of the Turkish COVID bank or a bond fund manager. If I'm going to lend to a country, I would look at their budget, their finances, whether the treasury is able to collect taxes, whether the economy is growing to generate enough taxes. And finally, but budget deficit were already expected to exceed 4.5% of GDP this year. Now, I don't know, maybe 6-7%. So, it is hard to make a case for buying Turkish sovereign debt, and corporates are not in good shape either. This is why central bank reserves are so important. And the central bank, unfortunately, has wasted a lot of reserves in a futile attempt to defend the currency. The numbers that we have obtained from independent economists are, over the last 12 months, central bank has lent through swap operations to state banks roughly $40 billion, which state banks sold in the FX market to stabilize the value of the Turkish lira. That money is gone. It's not coming back. The central bank finds these dollars by swapping TL for dollars with private banks. But when it shows its balance sheet, it accounts for the swap dollars as assets, but doesn't show it in the liabilities. So its balance sheet is extremely bloated. There is, it is creative accounting. I don't want to accuse anyone. And when we subtract the swap obligations from the data reported by central bank, we reach the very sad conclusion that it doesn't have any net FX reserves left. This, by the way, is not my personal opinion. These belong to the banks. They are lent or entrusted to the central bank as required reserves. And if banks start running out of hard currency, they will withdraw those. So the central bank's argument that growth times. But in my scenario, remember, these are not normal times. I expect the emerging markets to bleed funds, that's capital flight, for the next 12 months. For the next 12 months, Turkish banks and corporates have roughly $170 billion of foreign debt payments. Again, in normal times, there is no problem in rolling over that debt. But at a time like this, I don't know how much of it can be rolled over. It could be as little as 60 or 70%. Even if international creditors ignore Turkey-specific risks, the EM is usually treated as a single asset in the sense that funds invest into a diversified portfolio of EM nations and sell them at the same time, simultaneously, without much regard, soon receive withdrawals requests from banks, dollar withdrawal requests. And for that, Turkey doesn't have enough cash. The central bank, as a lender of last resort, has wasted its ammunition in these futile interventions. So several issues come to fore for the coming months. As banks tap the central bank reserves and make foreign payments, hard currency inflation, though that's not very likely in my view, it will certainly make it very difficult for corporates to shut down because of a lack of a demand or because of government regulations, are in a position to pay where people measure the performance of the economy and even the governing party by the strength of the Turkish lira. And if the Turkish lira tanks, the economic sentiment at large will decline substantially, which may have political repercussions in the sense that ought to be watched very closely. I think any further declines in the coming weeks would be a very strong signal to foreign investors as well as domestic investors to sell or get out of the banking system. And eventually it will become a matter of economic confidence that will further depress economic activity. I don't want to sound overly pessimistic. I think control. And if he does so, and if he comes up with additional measures to stop the upcoming wave of unemployment, the credibility of Turkey could increase, and we may have foreign investors revisiting the country as well as Turkish investors keeping their money in the banking system. I hope that's the case, and if that is the case, I am hoping to broadcast a cheerful scenario. Up until then, I suggest extreme caution to anyone who does trade or financing. You have just watched a broadcast of Real Turkey channel by Atilla Yeşilada. Please subscribe or more importantly, share it with those who are concerned or who do business with Turkey so we can spread the gospel around the world. Bye-bye now.